And so we are live. Hi, everybody. I'm Vanessa Baca, the manager for the City of Albuquerque Office of Neighborhood Coordination. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn on Neighborhood Conflict Management. I am going to start by saying the first name of our participants. They can introduce themselves, and then we will jump right in. Doreen, I'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Doreen McKnight, and I'm the president of the Wells Park Neighborhood Association.
Thanks for being part of this. Jesse?
Thanks, Vanessa. Hi, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Lawrence. I am a mediator. I am one of the contractors with the city's ADR program, which I'm sure Tyson will explain more. And I've been a contractor with the program for about 10 years now.
Thank you so much. Jocelyn?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jocelyn Torres, and I'm a mediator and facilitator for the city under contract. I'm a retired attorney, and I really enjoy what I'm doing. So thank you.
Thank you for being part of this. Patty?
Hi, my name's Patty Wilson. I'm currently the president of Victory Hills Neighborhood Association, serve as the treasurer for District 6 Coalition, and I'm starting to sign my emails unpaid IDO notification recipient.
I understand. Thank you so much. Nice to have you here. Rudy?
Hi, folks. My apologies. I joined in a little late with technical difficulties. Rudy Garcia, and good afternoon to everybody. Vanessa, thanks for having me. I'm a board member with Unicastle Neighborhood Association. I oversee the safety patrol, and I'm the block captain. Prior to that, I was a vice president for Ventana Ranch Neighborhood Association. Thanks
for being here, Rudy. We really appreciate it. And last but not least, Tyson the man. You're muted.
Thank you, Vanessa. So my name is Tyson Hummel. I am an assistant city attorney and the ADR program coordinator. So we at the city are really happy to be able to offer the community ADR services in a wide spectrum of applications. Land use being one, and another important one being able to support the efforts of neighborhood associations and other neighborhood organizations and efforts to sort of empower them to forward their own agendas and to act as their own self-advocates and to move their ideas and agendas forward in a way that's effective and efficient. So we're glad to support those things, and that's the context in which we'll be here today.
Thanks, Tyson. And I just want to say first off, the service you provide is extremely invaluable to not just our neighborhoods, but to our city residents in general. So we'll talk more about that at the end, but I just want to thank you all for being part of it. So in the interest of time, because I'm kind of a techno dummy, we are going to jump right in. I'm going to start with having Doreen talk about some experiences that she and her board experienced with Wells Park. And then I'm going to have Tyson and Jesse and Jocelyn give their perspectives, and then we'll go on to Patty and then to Rudy after that. So Doreen, if you want to just go ahead and give the overview of the situation your board experienced.
Sure. And Vanessa, did you want me to add in any of the things that sort of worked for us or what we did as well before responses from everyone else?
Yeah, I think that would be great, because you might have a different perspective than what the mediators and the attorneys might, and also you might give some folks in our audience some ideas about how to deal with something similar, because I know what you experienced has happened to others.
Sure, yeah. So I'll try not to go on too long. This is sort of years worth of things that we've dealt with in our neighborhood. So we've had various issues with both neighbors, so residents and board members over the years. And a few years ago, we had a particular issue with some very tense board meetings with topics of discussion that people felt really strongly about. Individuals showed up, I think some of them outside of the neighborhood association, but people had never come before. And it was really disruptive. And I think at the time that was my first experience in since running the board, where I had really experienced some hostility in a board meeting, and it kind of caught me off guard. At the time, I wasn't really sure how to handle it. And subsequent to that, I think that some good ideas came up and to help us better sort of deal with those situations in the future. And one of the things that maybe other people have used or may want to use, since then we hadn't had to use it, but we have it sort of in our back pocket, is that most neighborhood associations are governed by the Robert's Rules of Orders. They use those to run their meetings, whether or not it's formal or informal. We're pretty informal. But Robert's Rules of Order allow you to go into executive session. And I think that that is a particularly helpful way to essentially remove yourself and the board from a situation where there's hostile participants. It doesn't really help if one of your board members is maybe the particular person that's hostile, but if it's other people attending your meeting, and it gets to the point where you can no longer run an effective meeting, I think that that is, that's a good possibility of something that boards can do. And assuming that non-members refuse to leave, you can also have the board relocate to another location to go into executive session. And then I think also, I'm sure that the ADR folks will say this too, is if you anticipate a topic coming up at a board meeting that's going to be contentious, if you know beforehand, then you could probably reach out to the city ADR services to see if they can assist you with that at those meetings. And I for one know that we've definitely had agenda items where that's probably, that would be a good use of resources. And then of course, nowadays with Zoom, you can of course mute people or remove them if necessary. I try my best not to, threaten that or anything, because we want people to be able to participate, and we haven't had to do it so far, but I guess it is an option. The other incidences we've experienced in our neighborhood association the past few years is our particular resident neighbor, who was also on the board briefly, was very abusive to other board members, very disruptive and inappropriate, mainly via email. So luckily we were okay at board meetings, that it wasn't too out of hand, that we couldn't operate in that way. But it got to the point where we actually lost some board members because of this individual. And there was a lot of issues with misrepresentation of the neighborhood association in public. So the way we had handled that is, first of all, if you haven't already done it as a neighborhood association, I would recommend making sure your bylaws has some sort of removal process for those individuals. We did not have one of those until, we did not have a clause in there until, I believe it's been since I've been on the board, but later, I think probably in 2017 or around about there. And we had not had to use it yet, but we were really glad it was there in this instance, because it got to the point where we did have to put that individual on notice and remove them from the board so that we can continue to function properly. But my other recommendations would be to put everything in writing. Don't respond to emails if it's not necessary to, if they're just, attacking, and only respond to those emails where you feel like you have to really clarify, information, and don't do it the same day you get the email if tensions are high. I have found myself, okay, wait a day, wait till you calm down so that you can respond professionally, because that way the record shows that, that the remainder of the board, and if you're president, you're being reasonable. And then ensure your community partners are aware of situations, that they know who's permitted to speak on behalf of the neighborhood association. During these issues that we were having with this particularly abusive board member who was misrepresenting herself in public regarding her position on the board, I would get calls from our city councilor, from other individuals within city government who would call because they know me and would say, is this person speaking on behalf of the neighborhood association? This person is saying this, is that correct? And so making sure that they're on the same page with you. And then also obviously following your bylaws, but lastly, maybe it's setting out clear guidelines for board members as to like decorum and what's expected of them and how they represent themselves. We've actually had multiple incidences where particular board members that we had issues with would go to city council meetings on their own personal agendas, which is totally fine, you know, as members of the public, but they would say as their introduction that they were a board member of the neighborhood association. And so we would have to, you know, address that later because it gives the wrong impression. But I'd love to hear what the other ADR folks have to say about that. I mean, I didn't get into too much detail about our particular person, but it was mainly really abusive, accusatory, and inflammatory emails that mainly had incorrect or false information. And one of the things we've continued to have issues with that we don't really know exactly how to address is that particular individual's continued spread of misinformation throughout the neighborhood. It's kind of hard to combat that, but that's where we're at right now.
Sure. Thanks for sharing that, Doreen. I'd love to get Tyson and Jesse and Jocelyn's feedback on that. I'd also like, if possible, maybe like a couple of quick suggestions for maybe neighborhood groups that do not have this addressed in their bylaws, who are possibly in the process of updating their bylaws but don't have it yet, like what they could do in a similar situation where they're dealing with that abusive person in a meeting. Tyson, we'll let you go first if you want. But you have to unmute yourself first.
So one of the first things that Doreen had shared with us was, you know, Robert's rules as a way to just sort of add some structural integrity to the meeting and sort of just as a template, not to be followed religiously, of course, but, you know, it just as a starting point. And with regard to people who are being particularly disruptive and particularly off topic, sort of just distracting from the business at hand. Oftentimes, Robert's rules might not be able to solve all of the behavioral things, but there's an added benefit to it, and that is that it slows things down into a very logical, progressive process. And it takes someone's ability away to spin off into different issues, because I think that we can all relate to the experience of having this come up, and the person's not just on one focused topic. The longer they begin to spin and the more momentum and inertia they gain as they're ramping up, they start to spin off into unrelated topics that can't even be conceivably addressed in that context, but they're just throwing spaghetti at the wall at that point. So, you know, having the benefit of a process that intentionally slows things down and makes them more orderly and more compartmentalized, I think really takes a lot of steam away from those disruptive type personalities. Jesse, Jocelyn, what is your take? Because I know that you guys have dealt with some very impassioned people who really have a lot to say and have a hard time, you know, articulating it in a way that's respectful and productive sometimes. So how do you address those folks and help to manage the meeting?
Yeah, I think you said it exactly right, Tyson, about the chance to sort of add some more structure and try to figure out ways to create more format and also create those ways to sort of have those breaks and those times to think when things are really getting heated and really getting in a place where it's maybe veering off from the topic at hand. A lot of what I've done in a lot of different situations with the ADR program is actually just to sort of step in and help everyone sort of step back, you know, create that natural break where you can say, you know, this needs to, we need to step back here and we need to look at this more generally so people can talk about what those ground rules are, what the structure is, how, Doreen, you said something about making sure things are documented well, so you have that record. How are you creating those records to make sure you're going forward from there? I mean, just creating that sort of, that break and letting everyone say we need to cool down a little bit and think about how we're operating, and then put some of those things in place that you can all remind each other going forward. Well, we have these ground rules. This is how we're making decisions. This is who is representing us when we're talking to the public. And then you have that format for a reminder. I did want to throw in just a quick recommendation. Doreen, you had mentioned the use of Robert's Rules and how that's been so helpful for you. I wanted to say there's a really great book called Breaking Robert's Rules that is exactly about these sorts of groups and just having those informal sort of rules as you're operating. And I just wanted to mention that because it could be useful for others as well. Jocelyn?
Okay, well, I like what both Tyson and Jesse said. I think that, and then Doreen saying that you guys do have the bylaws and that they specifically address, problems like when there's misrepresentation or somebody is, out of line, either a board member or somebody participating in the meeting. I think that's really important because then you have some structure to say, this will not be happening in this meeting. Like if it were to continue and people keep disrupting the meeting, which I had a meeting a while ago with people from the city where they were asking me those questions, what if this person just keeps disrupting, and keeps disrupting? And I had studied their bylaws. They had great bylaws. And I said, you guys have really good bylaws. You just need to remind this board member that of the bylaws, and then you need to enforce them and not be, don't back off from that. You can be nice about it and polite and everything, but you need to enforce them. The other thing I liked about what both Jesse and Tyson said about the guidelines, Jesse and I had one time, and these people seemed like so totally peaceful. I was the facilitator, she was the co, and we thought they were so peaceful. And, in my mind, I thought, oh, I'm not even going to talk about guidelines because these people are just so well behaved and well controlled. Well, two guys were sitting near each other and they almost came to blows. And I hadn't said anything about the guidelines for that beginning of that meeting. So of course that reminded me that I do need to talk about the guidelines. And then the other thing, I didn't know what to do at that point because I thought, well, gosh, I don't want them to start punching each other out in this meeting. So I said, you guys need to sit down. And if you don't sit down, then we're going to have to take a break. And I think they took it like break, like meeting is done and we're not going to do this anymore, period. And I was just thinking, like what Jesse was saying, just slow it down, so that they don't come to blows. They just sat down and they participated in the whole meeting and they were fine. And we ended up getting a great resolution from that group. So I think I just would reiterate what Tyson and Jesse have said, and then don't be afraid, be nice about it and assertive. Don't be afraid to remind the people of Robert's Rules, the bylaws that you have, and the guidelines.
Yeah, those are great suggestions, all of you. And, I do want to take this opportunity to remind everybody, Robert's Rules are not required, but we recommend that you use them for that very purpose because they provide structure. They give a very specific way of running your meeting, and they give you that kind of that out, for lack of a better way to put it, if you do run into somebody who's abusive. And back to what Jocelyn said, a lot of times I think we're just raised to be polite people, and we don't really know how to deal with somebody who gets in our face, who's going to be aggressive or who's going to be rude and tries to disrupt the meeting. And I think, we've all, as professionals, learned, sometimes we have to be very firm. There's a way to do it politely, but don't allow yourself to be bullied. Don't, and I think that if somebody is acting in a certain way in a meeting, you're going to find that you're going to have support from your board members if you stand your ground and say, I respect your opinion, but we have a certain way of doing things in this meeting. And if you can't abide by our rules and be polite, then you need to leave the meeting. So that's very good examples of encouraging people to kind of kind of, dig their heels in and not allow themselves to be badly treated, whether it's in a meeting or in any situation. So thank you all for that. Patty, I wanted to switch over to you now. I know your particular board has had some mediation with ADR, and I was wondering if you'd want to talk about that and some of the conflicts that you all ran into and some thoughts on how you all were able to come to some sort of a resolution with that.
Sure, and we had talked about me being able to share my screen.
Yes.
But first of all, I want to, Doreen, either my neighbors moved to your neighborhood association or yours came to mine, because we have the same people.
Sometimes I think maybe there's something in the water.
Okay, so I have a bunch of stuff on my screen, and I'm going to go through documents one at a time. Can you all see the map of the Victory Hills Neighborhood Association boundaries?
Yes.
Okay, so where Santa Clara cuts through right in the middle, right south of Fairview Cemetery, and that's right here. 11 years ago, the former counselor had a barricade placed on Santa Clara eastbound to stop traffic coming from the sports venues. It was a temporary barricade that turned the residents of Santa Clara and the residents of San Rafael into the Hatfields and the McCoys. And so we, I went back through my notes of minutes, and I have stuff back to 2010 that this has been going on. So we were incapable of holding a meeting. The traffic committee was so at odds. There were people who would not sit in the same room. I ended up, when the whole thing was finished, preparing this handout because ultimately we produced and have on file this 95-page document that is this incredibly thorough traffic study, because there was so much disagreement about the closure or opening of this temporary thing that when Pat Davis became our counselor, he said, I need an official neighborhood association position. So from that point, it took us a year to even be able to have a meeting. We met with one mediator who people like couldn't get along with the mediator. We ended up working with another mediator who was originally contracted for 4 visits. And we worked with Bridges of Peace for over a year and put this report together, put it all to DMD, came up with a whole lot of solutions, we have the report published on Google Docs so that it's, let me stop the share now, so that it's available for anybody. I've had great feedback from DMD about what's in the report. But like a lot of reports, it sometimes just ends up sitting on the shelf. But there were, what the process proved to us was if you take the personalities and the emotionality out of it and follow the mediator's rules and guidelines, it's like, no, you can't say that. So we were really pleased with the process ultimately. So.
Tyson, did you want to maybe talk a little bit about how a neighborhood group might go about getting assistance from ADR if they find themselves in a situation either similar to what Patty's group experienced, or even maybe something similar to what Doreen's group experienced?
Sure. We take referrals in multiple different ways. So you can reach out to us directly. We're on the City of Albuquerque website, and our numbers are all well published. So just reaching out directly and talking to us, we're perfectly accessible that way. You can also make Vanessa aware of a situation that you're facing. We collaborate very frequently with ONC to help people work their way through conflict or to work towards goals that don't involve conflict. Either way, we're happy to collaborate there. City council staff often sends people our way, the counselors, policy analysts, and things like that. So there's multiple different ways to reach out and to get our services. The thing that I'd really like to emphasize and to invite everyone on the call to take advantage of is that our services that we can help you with don't necessarily have to come from our published menu of services. And what I mean by that is, if you're facing a challenge and you'd like assistance, bring it to us and we can consult and we can help to craft a remedy or a solution for you that will meet your needs, even though it's kind of off menu. So we're more than happy to create custom projects and efforts of that nature.
And Tyson, the services that ADR provides, they're free, is that correct? And they're not just for neighborhood groups, they're for individual residents, and they can deal with things like child custody issues, you know, as well as neighborhood conflicts and conflicts with other city agencies, is that correct?
Right, exactly. And so we do have a facet of our program. It's one of the core facets of our program, and it's the community mediation program. And it's when neighbors, community members, pretty much every single context you can think of, everything from court-related things, property-related things, interpersonal conflicts, but we can provide professional mediation services to help work through those. We're flexible on our times, our hours, our days of the week. We can work with you and provide a way for you to work through those conflicts. And it is no cost, no direct cost to the participants for any of the services.
Yeah, okay, awesome. Jesse and Jocelyn, I wanted to ask you really quickly, because one of the questions I got before this session was if there's an example of like some specific verbiage or wording or language that you guys could give right now that people could utilize if they are in a situation in a meeting where somebody is being hostile or being, you know, hateful or ugly or bullying, if somebody's standing up and kind of maybe talking in your face with the finger, what are some quick kind of just in the moment things that people can say or do to kind of nip it in the bud before it escalates?
You know, Vanessa, my initial reaction is that is so much easier if you already have some ground rules in place, something that you can refer back to when you can just say, you know, that's not how we operate here. Without those things in place, my default is usually to say, honestly, let's take a break. Let's you and I talk. Let's see if we can work out what your concern is, so we can figure out how to address it. And I would call for a break and try to figure out whether that goes to a next meeting or a 10-minute water break, whatever that may be, to try to diffuse the issue and address the issue. I don't want to confront a person. I don't want them to get on the defensive. That's not really addressing the concern. That's not helping the group move forward. So that would be my default option, to try to see if I can figure out how we can move forward from there when there's something like that going on, because there was a reason behind it, and let's figure out what that is.
Okay.
I agree with what Jesse has said. Another thing that I think of is you can tell the people at the very beginning, and I like to tell people, especially when we're in person. Now with the Zoom, it's a lot different. But I would say, you know, if you need to take a break, just let us know and we can take a break sometime during this session. So, because sometimes people feel stressed when they think, oh my gosh, I've got to sit here for 2 hours and I can't even get up and I can't get water and I can't go to the bathroom and I can't this and that. And so then if you announce the break, like the way Jesse said, then they're already thinking, oh yeah, we had talked about taking a break anyway. So, you know, we could go ahead and take a break. The other thing we do a lot in mediation, because people seem to get, in my experience, they seem to get more worked up in mediation than they have in the neighborhood types of meetings. Reframing. So if somebody says, boy, I just hate that person because they have such a big tree and it's, you know, messing up my yard or something like that. If a person reframes, you can soften that language. Oh, okay, so they're next door and there's a tree that you're concerned about. So in other words, you're not hating the person, you're just worried about the tree. And so we do a lot of reframing also in facilitated meetings, but a lot in mediation, because mediation is a little bit different and the people get, they're closer to the issue, I think, closer to the problem. And so then they get more upset. And so we need to use more of the mediator tools to go ahead and help them to see things in a different light. I think that's a good way to put it. And I agree with Jesse, don't confront them, because if they're angry and then they want to take out their anger on you, then it's just going to be a problem. Another thing, sometimes they'll say, like one time when Zoom started, we met at the developers or at the agent's office just because they had the Zoom. And then later on, I guess people were saying that somehow the facilitators might have liked the agents better than we liked them or something like that. You know what I mean? So we never even addressed that. All we did was later on, we met in a church and everybody was so happy with that church and with that meeting. And we had the 6-foot distance and things like that. The other thing I was going to say to Doreen, sometimes when people are putting things in email, they're trying to bait you. So they'll say something like really rude and then they want you to say something rude back. Do you really have to respond to that email is my first thought. And then after that, you know, if you feel like you have to state it for the record or something, especially when I was working around other people, now I work at home, but I would ask somebody else, hey, I'm framing this email. Can you look at a draft and see what it looks like to you and get a second opinion? Because you don't want to get caught either in a war of words, especially one where you're kind of like, you didn't initiate it and you're getting trapped in the middle of it. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
No, those are great. I mean, I think we could all definitely relate to, you know, hitting a reply in a fit of anger and then regretting it later. I certainly know I have. So that's very, very good. I appreciate that. Rudy, I wanted to switch over to you now. I know I've worked with your board quite extensively, and you all seem to have a pretty good working relationship amongst yourselves. But I know that in your role also as a block captain and your focus on neighborhood safety, I know you've run into some kind of neighborhood conflicts that maybe are outside of the realm of the typical neighborhood board. I was wondering if maybe you could talk about like what you've experienced and how possibly you've helped people come to some sort of a resolution.
Sure. Thanks, Vanessa. I do want to thank Doreen and Patty and the other board members on the call for serving on a neighborhood association board. Oftentimes people forget that we're volunteers, that we're not getting paid for this. And it's more our sense of wanting to do good in the community. So sometimes that's forgotten in the process. So thank you guys for serving on your neighborhood association boards. And trust me, I have served on federal, county, state, private business boards, and they all have similar issues. It's all human based. When you're dealing with human beings, you're dealing with behaviors, and it's interesting. I was dean of students at C&M. I was there 27 years, so I was a disciplinarian for 35,000 students and faculty. And one thing I learned is that don't take it personally. I would be screamed at, yelled at, threatened. But one thing that I took from that job that I brought into the neighborhood association boards is that, one, I always respect the person that is in front of me. I always have empathy and sympathy, because you're dealing with a person sometimes in board meetings that may be angry about an issue or passionate about something. They have high anxiety. They may have fear, and it's manifesting itself in a very different way. And if I can step back and think about them as a human being and not necessarily focus on the personality, but I can focus on the issue, and I don't let my emotions control the process, I allow myself to have a process in place, whether that's with bylaws or ground rules, but I have a process in place that I feel confident I can follow. And I feel confident that other board members will support me, as well as I'll support them on that process. Then I feel pretty good that I can resolve a situation. And I'll say this, after 27 years at CNN, I had thousands of cases. 99.9% of people are good by nature. You have that 0.1% that no matter what you do, they are not going to change. And you have to enact another process to deal with that. But 99.9% of people are really good. One thing I found that in boards in the neighborhood association is that when you have a process and you follow the process, you have the bylaws, good bylaws, and you have the support of your board, then things can be done very well. Now, here's the one thing I will say about boards. Many of us don't get trained to be on a board. We basically either get selected or volunteer to be on a board, but we're not trained on how to handle human behavior in the process of being board members. We're not trained on what if Rudy goes off on me in the middle of a board meeting, what do we do? You don't have a book that you can go to chapter 5 and say, oh, Rudy going off on a board member, here's what you do. That's something that I think would be beneficial for all of us, is board member training on how to deal with these situations, and resource manuals to be able to say, oh, here's it's ADR, right? Did I say that correctly? Here's ADR as a resource. Here's ONC as a resource, the various resources that people can rely on. Or I'm going to call Patty. Hey, Patty, what did you do in this? Hey, Doreen, what did you do when that guy threw pie at you? How do we handle that? So that I've seen is that we tend to rely on our experiences to deal with situations that many of us haven't. I'm lucky. I have dealt with confrontation a good percentage of my life and how to deal with that. So I've been very lucky from that perspective. And Vanessa mentioned I'm in charge of the safety stuff for the neighborhood, and that's why the board elected me. They said, hey, you're the guy that's dealt with all the confrontational issues. We're going to make you the safety guy. And for me, once again, I've dealt with a lot of different safety issues here with respect. That's what it comes down to, focusing on the issue, focusing on what is happening with the situation. If somebody is, and when I say safety, we actually are one of the few neighborhoods that has a safety patrol. That means we patrol our neighborhood in yellow vest. We're part patrol member, we're part goodwill ambassador for the neighborhood, we're part welfare check people. We're a mixture of a lot of different things. What we are not is a vigilante force or a police force. We're neighbors dedicated to civic engagement and civility within our neighborhood. So we encounter a lot of different things, homeless issues, transients, potential suspicious activity. We do not engage, we observe and we listen. We're the eyes and the ears for basically APD. But in my process of interacting with that, what's interesting is that as we patrol, we become the eyes and ears of the neighborhood. I've had just about every neighbor in my neighborhood talk to me in the process of doing these patrols. And it's interesting what you hear. I hear complaints, I hear angst, I hear good things. And I'll say this, Patty and Doreen probably will agree, every neighborhood association I'm familiar with has concerns with safety. They have concerns with development. They have concerns with traffic. We all have similar concerns. What's nice about the interactions that I have with neighbors is I'm able to talk to them outside the scope of a neighborhood meeting, which is a different scenario than in a neighborhood meeting. And oftentimes I'll coach them, hey, Rudy, I want to go to the board because I'm angry about this issue. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to let them have it. Well, let me talk to you about how you should do that. There's a process, and here's the process. And this will keep you from going into a meeting and the emotions controlling what logic should control. I've always said, let your emotions guide you in the process, but don't let it control you in the process. And neighborhood associations, neighbors can be passionate about a lot of things. I'm also the guy that will get the calls. Hey, I saw that suspicious looking guy with the hoodie, Rudy, do something about it. I said, well, that suspicious guy was actually the neighbor's kid jogging down the street. So they're really not the suspicious guy you think of, but thanks for calling me. That's very important. I appreciate the call. That was very kind of you to make that call. We used to have a board member that would say, why are you calling me? That's stupid. Call 911. Let the police handle that. You know, I'm on the board. My nature is that I signed on to take calls. I signed on to get emails. So it's pretty straightforward. But when it comes to the safety component, we interact with a lot of different personalities, a lot of different behaviors. What I do try to do is provide enough training for the safety patrol members to know how to handle a situation so that they are not dependent on just their own knowledge of how to do something, and also keeps them safe. I take that to the board and try to train the board from that perspective. Here's what we did, and here's why we did it, and here's how we handle it. I'm also working with an outside entity, APD. I'm also working sometimes with International Protection Services. Some folks have that. So I'm working with outside entities, and it's all about a partnership. Sometimes I've seen the cyberbullying come, and one thing I'll say is that people are very strong to be a bully behind the screen of a computer, but they're different in person. Yep. And so one thing I've always tried to do is, can I talk to you over the phone or in person instead of having this dialogue over email? Because I find that that shifts the dynamics of the relationship into more of an interactive relationship where, hey, I'm respecting you, you should respect me, because we're trying to resolve this issue together, not separately. We may agree to disagree, and that's okay, but let's have a dialogue on this. Expectations, the ground rules. One thing we've always seen with the NA boards I've been on is that you can have great ground rules, but they're only as good as the people who enforce them. And if you don't enforce the ground rules, then why have them? That's what it comes down to. You can be nice about it, but at the same time, one of our previous meetings, there was a person starting to yell and scream, and nobody was doing anything about it. And had we just said, look, here's the ground rules. You had your 2 minutes. We appreciate that. I know you're passionate about this issue. Why don't we put it in the parking lot where we can discuss it after the meeting, or we can discuss it over the phone? But right now we need to focus on the agenda and we need to move forward with it. So thank you for the input. We appreciate that. So just some insight there. Circling back to safety, the dynamics of a safety program are interesting because you are out there on the streets, literally walking your neighborhood, and you are seeing a whole different view than just being on the board or just being in the neighborhood association. You're interacting with more of the public, maybe, than you are just the neighborhood association. And the conflict and the confrontations will be different than you might have versus board and the neighborhood association. But the theory is the same. Empathy, sympathy, respect, having a process, following your ground rules. We have ground rules for the safety patrol. My philosophy behind conflict is that it's productive if you address it. And as humans, when it comes to conflict, we want to run. And for many of us, if we ignore it, then it'll go away, but it doesn't. It just gets bigger sometimes. Yeah. And I'm a big theory in that by nature, I run to conflict. That was my job as dean of students. You run to conflict. And people said, you're nuts. Why do you do that? I said, because if I don't address it right away, it's not going to get resolved. You know, I've dealt with various mediation programs, the juvenile justice type based mediation, conflict resolution. A lot of those practices do very well with neighborhood association type interactions. Any training that I think we all can get in that is going to be beneficial for our interactions with neighbors. I think the one thing that sometimes our own neighborhood associations don't realize is that we're all in this together versus it's just my voice and your voice. I think the other thing that we need to do is that I find that many people who are passionate and angry in a board meeting, they're not being heard. They just want to be heard. All I want is to tell you what I'm angry about. Listen to me. And if you listen to me, then I'll feel better. Like one neighbor told me, hey, Rudy, you didn't agree with me, but you listened to me. I thank you for that. I appreciate that. Thank you for listening to me. The other board members weren't listening to me. I said, hey, no problem. Sorry, it's not going to get resolved, but hey, you know, you had a right to voice your opinion, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, those are really great techniques, Rudy. I like what you said, particularly about acknowledging someone and letting them know that you're listening. And I wanted to ask Tyson and Jesse and Jocelyn if you find that an effective technique when you're dealing with mediations, is just simply kind of turning it back to the person who's having the conflict and acknowledging that their concern, that it's valid, and you know, is that you think that's something that every neighborhood group has the potential to do?
I think so, Vanessa. And Rudy, yeah, I really liked how you phrased a lot of the description of those techniques. So much of our role as the mediators and the contractors that come in are just to sort of hold that place where people can talk about what those concerns are, where they can express those emotions, and to make sure that they have a place and a way that they can express those emotions to each other. Because a lot of the time when we get called in, or when, you know, we're at the table with people, it's because they have not been able to do that and haven't been able to find a way to do that. And all we're doing is providing a process, providing a place so that they can actually have that conversation. And so often that's all you need to do. And you provide that place and it helps diffuse things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think also I did some work with, well, as a team, but we did some work with a group from the city, and it was the board was not getting along with people from the agency and vice versa. And it seemed like what helped was we had several different sessions, but just like the people getting to know each other, and then having some kind of an incentive for the next session. And that's hard on Zoom because you can't, you know, have cookies and cake and coffee, but, you know, to think of kind of like the basics, like, are we meeting the basics here? And mediation used to have a lot to do with that, you know, with having maybe snacks at the table or something like that so people could relax. I think people need to have like a reason for what they're doing and a reason for why they like and respect the other members of the board or the members of the agency or the community or whatever it is. And I think if neighborhood associations, if you can think of some incentives and you can give people space, like what Jesse was saying, you know, sometimes they're just going to have a lot of emotion over an issue or the day they had or something like that, and give people a little bit of space to be able to voice that and then say that you understand. Especially with mediation, I've been able to help people come to a settlement where in my mind at the very beginning of the mediation, I thought these people are never going to settle this case. Yeah. And sure enough, sometimes they come back for a second session, mm-hmm. And they settle. And I'm like the most surprised that they were able to settle, but they did need some space. They needed somebody to respectfully listen to them. And they needed to be able to vent their emotions like in a positive way. So, and then you help them come to a good solution, you know, for whatever the problem may be. So those are some ideas I also have.
Those are great. Yeah, those seem really useful and very easy to put into effect in any kind of any kind of a group environment, not just necessarily a neighborhood association. So thank you for that, Jocelyn. I really appreciate it. So a couple of the questions that I got from some of our attendees today tie in with what Rudy was talking about and a little bit with what Doreen was talking about in terms of cyber and electronic bullying. And one of the questions I got was specific to people using Nextdoor as sort of a place to bully. And I think all of us who utilize social media have seen how comment threads can get very ugly very quickly. My personal suggestion, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is that if you do utilize something like Facebook or Nextdoor, make sure have specific rules in place that govern how people communicate with you and with your group on Facebook. Have some sort of a disclaimer, abusive language will not be tolerated, things of that nature. And if for something like Nextdoor, my office doesn't use it, but I know some other residents do, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on how people can continue to use maybe Nextdoor in a beneficial way for their neighborhood communications, but also how to deal with that inevitable cyber bullying, for lack of a better way to put it. And I'll whoever wants to start, because I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
I just recently signed up for the Nextdoor, and I just read whatever people post, but I don't really post anything. I guess I'm curious about the Nextdoor, because it seems like anybody could pose as a neighbor and then say like they're spying on you or your neighborhood or what you say and what you do and all that. So I probably will just get off of it anyway, not even reading the posts. But if people are using that for bullying and things like that, I don't think that's a good resource. I mean, now we have Zoom, they have Google Meets, they have all kinds of things that a person can use even for free if you want to be able to view people and talk to people. And I don't see Nextdoor as a very good option, but that's my own.
Okay, Patty?
Where I see Nextdoor valuable is sort of real-time safety issues. I heard gunshots. Should I call 242 cops? There's a suspicious looking car cruising around. There was a guy over my backyard fence, those kind of things. We don't have a website specifically for Victory Hills. So we use the Victory Hills Nextdoor page and the Victory Hills Facebook page for announcements and like the city planning, the community planning assessment process that's going on right now. The Near Heights area, which doesn't correspond exactly to District 6, but includes our area, is the first area that's going through this process. So I've been trying to get more and more people involved in attending these meetings for the planning assessment. And when I see something that seems disruptive on Nextdoor, I try to just diffuse it and provide facts, like, no, that isn't the case or whatever. But it really does become a location for people who would not say things directly to somebody's face. So
yeah, for sure.
And Vanessa, we use Nextdoor. The safety patrol uses it to post suspicious behavior or activities, but I also train folks to post based on who, what, when, where, no opinion, no bias, no stereotype, just stick to the facts. One thing I will say based on my experience with cyberbullying, social media, is that those who do it on social media tend to do it because they can control it. And they oftentimes get a joy out of seeing what's coming back at them. And I used to tell the faculty at C&M, if you're getting caught down that rabbit hole, don't. At some point, just say, I'm not going to have a dialogue with you because this is an uncivil, not a civil conversation. Thank you. Have a good day. End of dialogue. And we used to do that. What I've seen with some folks who are cyber bullies, once you stop that connection, that ends the game for them. There is no more game. There is no more dialogue. I'm even to go a step further and say, look, I'm more than happy to have this conversation with you in private, but I'm not going to have it on this media or in this platform. If I know the person. If I don't know the person, then that's it. It's over. I'm not gonna go down. Life is too short to get caught in a dialogue over a screen and get yourself upset over things that in some cases you're being baited on.
Yep.
And if I could add, I think everybody had great points, and the only thing that I would add to it was to really think about the purpose of however you're trying to engage people. As everyone said, Nextdoor and things like that are great for announcements, that you found something on the street, lost and found, things like that. But when you want to create a plan, engage around an issue, that's when you really need to figure out, and it's been hard in the past year, figure out how to get those conversations happening. People who attend land use meetings that I do know that I even try to discourage that sort of commentary running in the chat, because I find that people tend to feel free to just say things in a much meaner way when they're typing it out and when they're in the chat. And I want people to speak to each other and really engage about whatever the topic is. And so I try really hard to say, I want you all to talk to each other here, because this issue is important for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically having ground rules for, interactions online is as effective as it is having them for in-person meetings. That makes sense. I think that's good information, and it's something that everybody can do. So probably should all be doing. One last question. I want to make sure we don't have any questions from our attendees, and we still have a little bit of time, but I'm sure all of us have other things to do. So this is just a question that came up in conversation with one of my colleagues about this webinar. And at what point do you escalate any kind of like threatening, abusive behavior, like similar to what Doreen experienced? At what point do people need to escalate it if they don't feel safe? I've had several neighborhood associations reach out with horror stories of being physically threatened with violence, being physically threatened, with, racial threats, racial bullying. And my thought, I'd be really interested, Tyson, especially from your perspective as a city attorney, at what point do do people say, okay, I'm done trying to talk to you, I'm calling APD? I think you're muted.
It's funny that you mentioned that. We actually had a neighborhood association. Actually, there's a couple of them that were trying to meet together, and we actually had to have APD officers present because it had gotten so rowdy. It's an unfortunate situation that sometimes, when people are in conflict, one of the primary things I like to point out to folks is that when you're embroiled in conflict, you're not at your best problem solving wise. Things that you would all otherwise be able to solve through logic and reason are beyond your grasp because you're too focused on the conflict at hand. And it often leaves people with a very limited and one-faceted view of objective reality. So one of the things that we really try to focus on with people, especially when they've lost their power when it comes to problem solving, is to re-empower them by helping them to understand that that they can get the conflict under control, that they can manage the mutual situation and see each other as people and not as adversaries.
Doreen, go ahead.
I was just going to note that, I think that at any point when someone feels, physically threatened or in harm's way, you have to make that decision for yourself about when to engage, law enforcement to protect yourself. But I know that in the situations that we've faced in our neighborhood, that there have been other individuals who have actually gotten restraining orders against a particular neighbor. And it got to the point about a year ago that I did seriously consider doing that as well. I mean, I don't take that lightly, but it is an option. Bullying or threats via or harassment via phone or email is illegal. That is a crime, and you can report that, and you can get a restraining order based on that behavior if it doesn't stop. And I think part of that too is, kind of your own personality. In my case, while it was really bothersome, I got to the point where I just ignored those emails. I just, you didn't open them, you didn't read them, and it didn't get to the point where I felt like it was necessary, but I can see how that could definitely happen for people. And so it's probably just on a case-by-case basis, but I mean, you have to utilize those avenues if you feel like you can't continue on with your normal day-to-day life because of the harassment.
Okay.
I think too that what I like to do is like to think it through, because sometimes a person just thinks, hey, I could do this. I could go to their door and I could tell them that their dogs are barking and I can do this. But you have to think it through. Like, okay, what's the upside? Maybe the dogs stop barking or whatever, and you talk to the neighbor and they're so reasonable and happy to see you. But the downside is maybe they have those dogs for a reason. Maybe it's they're people that are violent anyway or whatever. So you have to, what I try to tell myself in a situation like that, or those that I advise, is like, think it through. I mean, the upside is getting everything resolved. The downside could be really bad. So if you need the help, from the city of Albuquerque, especially people in neighborhood associations, homeowners associations, you can call animal control. You can call 311. You can call 242 cops. Don't start calling 911, but there are a lot of other options without just charging in there, like you're the superhero and you have to do it yourself. And so that's, I guess the advice I would give is just think it through. And if it's a good situation to go ahead and handle it yourself, then you've already thought about it. You've thought about the good parts and the bad parts, and you've decided to go ahead and do it, and it'll probably turn out just fine. But there are other options besides doing everything yourself.
Yeah. Rudy, go ahead.
Sorry, had to unmute there. I think what it comes down to is, and I've had threats, and they're not nice. They're not comfortable. It's hard to be in that type of situation, but I think if a process has been followed and you've done everything in that process to work with a neighbor, and I'm talking as a neighborhood association, and that still continues to go south on you, then you should not hesitate to utilize the resources available to you, and talk to your board members, whether that's contacting APD or contacting an attorney or contacting city services or mediation. I think sometimes people are afraid to go down that path when they might have to. I'm not saying that happens every day. I know sometimes if I know I'm going to go into a difficult conversation with a neighbor regarding a board issue, I may ask another board member to be with me and say, hey, let's do this together. Let's plan it out, what we're going to say, how it's going to go. Let's show empathy, sympathy. Like I said, it's not that it happens on an everyday basis, but it does happen. And it's not good to be threatened. It's not good to be bullied. But at least I know I can control my actions. And if I feel that I've controlled my actions to the best possible to try and resolve what's happening within that relationship, I'm okay with that. But I also know if I've done everything I can and that other party continues to be aggressive in their behavior, I'm gonna have to result in following whatever protocol I need to follow to ensure my safety and the safety of the other person, and hopefully try to build the relationship or resolve the relationship in a very professional, civil way.
Yeah. No, that's very good reminder. I think, our personal safety is has to be the first consideration before anything else. When my office gets calls about how to deal with, problem neighbors, or somebody's dog is barking all the time, or, somebody has too many cars in front of their house, you know, my first instinct is to always tell people, well, have you thought about maybe going over and just saying hi? You know, kind of the whole idea of being the neighbor that you wish that you had, or modeling that behavior. But again, at the same time, as Jocelyn pointed out, you know, if you think it through, and you know, we have, I think, as human beings, good instincts about what's a safe situation and what's not. So if it's a situation where we know it's probably not going to end up going well for us, then I absolutely concur. You know, use the city resources you have at your disposal. Contact my office. I'm happy to put you in touch with ADR. I'm happy to put you in touch with people, you know, within other city departments that might be able to help you, whether it's code enforcement, or even if, you know, you're not comfortable necessarily calling 242 cops or 911, you know, you can contact your crime prevention specialist, who are civilian staff of APD and who are trained to not, you know, to help you figure out these neighborhood situations without escalating it to bringing in police officers. So there are a wide variety of options available for everybody, and I think every situation. And you know, and having this online forum today hopefully is you know, providing one more resource. Go ahead, Tyson.
I would say, just as a general 30,000 foot view, is don't let the aggressive personality control the audience, or be able to select or limit the audience. Turn the lights on, make it very transparent what's happening. Let people in on the conversation or the behavior that's going to make it embarrassing and uncomfortable, and spotlight the unacceptable behavior. Bullying personalities often like to perform for a limited audience, but it's only the ones that they select. If it's on blast for everyone to see, they often shrink quite substantially and tend not to like daylight. So turn the lights on, get everybody involved, make a unified voice, and you're not embroiled in an interpersonal conflict. You're acting on behalf of an association of community members who share your values and interests, and you're helping to protect that common interest by advocating against this disruptive personality. So you're actually doing something that is in line with your mission. You're not actually engaging in conflict. You're refusing to tolerate intolerable behavior that's not productive for your common goal. So reframing it in that way, and just sort of being sort of indifferent to it, but just putting it completely on blast, it shuts them down in a lot of cases that we deal with.
Okay. Like, what would be an example of some language that somebody could use, like in that immediate moment, if somebody is acting that way in a meeting and they need to stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, like what is some language that's good, but that's not going to make the situation worse?
So the approach that I was just describing is more effective, not in the actual moment of the meeting. So I would defer to Jesse and Jocelyn if they have advice on that. The approach I was describing is more of a management approach to how to manage something that's brewing and getting out of control, and the email chains are growing and the messages are piling up in that kind of situation.
Yeah.
I think that it reminds me of when I was teaching, and I was teaching mid school and high school, and a lot of times, you know, the troublemaker wanted the attention, and they wanted the attention from the teacher, and then they wanted me to get all upset and this and that. And so I would deflect the attention to the students. So I'd say, you know, you're going to have to go to the library and sit there for this class. Basically, I put them on a timeout to go to the library, and I would say, this isn't because of me or my interests, but you're disrupting 23 students that are here trying to learn. And that's just not working for the class. It's just not working. And it usually took, you know, a couple trips to the library, and then they started realizing they weren't going to get the attention they needed. They weren't going to get some kind of benefit that they thought they were going to get, and they weren't going to get me all riled up. So then they figured out, kind of like what Tyson was saying, it just wasn't productive. But you bring it to light, and then you don't I mean, I think the best way to do it is don't think about yourself as like, oh gosh, am I going to seem like a bully if I tell this person that they need to be quiet? You think about, wait a second, who are they disrupting? They're disrupting this whole agency. They're disrupting this whole board. They're disrupting this whole neighborhood. And I'm here trying to protect the neighborhood. So, you know, I think that can empower your thinking as well, because you're trying to do something really good for others. You're not just empowering yourself for no reason.
Yeah. Rudy, go ahead.
I'm going to go back to what we talked about earlier. That's where I think ground rules can play a very strong way in a board meeting when somebody's becoming disruptive. If you have ground rules and you set some time limits, I think that you can use that as your back. Hey, remember the ground rules. Here are the ground rules, 2 minutes. We need to move on. And then we can continue this conversation outside the scope of this board meeting, if you like, or we can put it in the parking lot. But I'm a huge advocate of ground rules. What I see in board meetings is people don't follow their ground rules. They're afraid to follow ground rules for fear that they're going to be called a bully themselves, and they're not. Ground rules are there for a reason, to allow a meeting to continue in a civil, productive fashion. And the one person I dealt with in a previous board meeting, it was interesting when I said, let's take this to the parking lot. After the meeting, I said, hey, let's talk. And he said, sure. I said, do you know why I called the ground rules in the 3 minute? He goes, no. I said, because you were getting loud and I felt that I wanted to hear what you wanted to say, but it was turning more into a shouting match, and that wasn't a correct way to take care of that. That's why I called the ground rules, so that we could have this dialogue. And he said, I didn't even notice my behavior. I didn't realize I was doing that. I said, no. And I said, sometimes that happens. That's okay. But I wanted to make sure you understood where I was coming from, because I want everybody to have the opportunity to dialogue and address their concerns within the time limits that we set with the ground rules that we had. After that, we became good. I mean, we were fine. It's just he didn't realize no. Was he a bully? No. People thought he was. It was just he did not recognize his own behavior in that setting.
Yeah. And you brought it to his attention in a very non-aggressive and non-threatening way. So I can understand that why he didn't respond in an aggressive way back. And he's like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't even realize. I think all of us do that sometimes. We're so in our heads sometimes that we don't realize, you know, how we might come across to other people. So that's an excellent technique, Rudy. I might use that. Well, we are coming up on the 1.5 hour mark. I wanted just to check and make sure nobody had anything else to add. I think I've asked all of the questions that our participants gave us. Did any of you have anything else you wanted to add that might be of value to our people who are participating? Patty, go ahead.
In terms of agreeing to ground rules via Zoom, one of the things that Michaela Renz-Whitmore does on the community planning assessment sessions is she has an introduction she does, and then she goes over the ground rules and she asks everybody to please type, I agree, or yep, or you betcha in the chat bar. So it forces everybody to physically say, yes, I'm acknowledging this.
That's a great idea. I think I'm going to use that technique as well. That's a really great idea. Thank you for that, Patty. And thank you, Michaela, wherever you are. Well, I thank you all very much. I really appreciate. Rudy, did you have something else to add? Sorry.
No, I just wanted to thank everybody. Thank you, Vanessa, for hosting this, and ADR. Yeah, the one thing I just want to emphasize is we live in a pandemic, crazy world right now, and it's hard to practice civility, and it's hard to practice patience. But if we do that and we're kind to each other, I think in our minds we could be better people when we're dealing with situations that require sanity and civility.
Yeah, I agree. You know, we think, or as I like to tell people, you know, try to be the neighbor that you wish that you had. Pretty simple, pretty basic. So Tyson, Rudy, Jesse, Doreen, Jocelyn, Patty, I can't tell you how grateful I am that you were all able to participate. This was really, really terrific session. I'm so glad we did this. been wanting to do this for quite a long time. So I'm very grateful for you all taking the time. I know you're busy people, so I owe you Starbucks, chocolate, whatever you want.
Thank you,
all.
Vanessa. It's been a lot of fun. We're glad to do it.
I
Thank
appreciate
you,
it as
Vanessa.
well.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Vanessa.
I did record the session, so I'll be putting it up on the ONC's YouTube channel probably within the next couple of days. If you all need to refer to it or you want to send it to anybody, please do so.
Outstanding.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
It's a real
Bye-bye.
pleasure.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.